Sometimes I do. Um, I know a lot of people don't like to talk about mixed topics on YouTube channels, but I don't really care. And I make my channel just to talk about things that I think are interesting and that I have something to say about. So that sometimes includes the war situation in different places, and usually, unfortunately, these days, I talk when I talk about war, I'm talking about the war happening with Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Hezbollah, or Israel and other groups that are attacking it. And there was a recent article in the New York Times pointing out that Israel is facing all these military fronts on 7 different military fronts, from Iran to the Houthis to Hezbollah to Hamas, the PIJ and the Palestinian, the PA and its armed wings of the PLO and other groups, and basically pointing the finger at Israel, saying, "Why are you so aggressive that you're fighting so many wars?" To which I have to say, no, wait a second. Israel didn't start any of those wars, or begin the fighting on any of those fronts. All of those fronts have been launched by those other fronts against Israel. So why are they all attacking Israel? To which the answer is very simple, right? You've got countries like Iran or Syria or Lebanon, right? Or the Palestinian territories, which are controlled by, effectively, forms of dictatorship. Doesn't matter what kind, theocracy, or whether they're elected, democracies in Gaza, which is kind of hard to call it a democracy, but they did vote. The people there did vote for Hamas all those years ago, and they have not replaced them. They've not voted them out of power, and they've not shown any desire to vote them out of power in large numbers, despite the very courageous minority that would like them to be out of power. All too often, that brave minority is abused and oppressed, and violently so, by Hamas. Right? All these countries and groups and terrorist organizations that are attacking Israel are doing so because they're deflecting people's attention. They're diverting people's attention from their own wrongdoings. It's very simple. Right? They want to take over the world and make it an extremist, Islamist, fundamentalist state, under Sharia law. And they all have their own versions of what that Sharia law should be. Right? Some are Sunni, some are Shia. But ultimately, they just want to take over and have all the power and be oppressive as hell and not give people equal rights and treat women like objects and treat anybody that isn't, a straight male as a second-class citizen or a subhuman, right? And in many ways, they're more extremist than the Third Reich Nazis. Like, literally, they're more extremist. They just don't have the means at their disposal to be able to kill as many Jews as the Nazis did. But if they had it, they probably would try, right? If they had the means. And you can say, well, Iran might already have nuclear weapons and hasn't used them, or is very well on the way to having nuclear weapons and could use them as soon as they have them. Yeah, they might, right? And that would be obviously a terrible thing for anybody who likes Israel or likes democracy or likes liberal values or likes the fact that men and women and everybody has equal rights in Israel. It doesn't matter if you're straight or gay or bi or lesbian or transgender or whatever, you have equal rights in Israel, right? And people who are straight can get married in Israel, and people who are not straight can get married in Israel, right? And they still have equal rights, right? That's a thing. Oh, wait, what do you write here? Do I listen to Elvis? I love Elvis Presley. Can't help but fall in love. Yeah, man. And Viva Las Vegas. Great songs, man. What am I blathering about? I'm blathering about the war between Israel and Hamas, and the war between Israel and Hezbollah. Right? Is that not clear? Anyway, yeah, I love Elvis. Great singer he was. So again, I would say it's not Israel that's creating these wars. I'm a transgender illegal alien in prison. Well, sorry to hear that you're a transgender illegal alien in prison. I must say, if you have internet connection in prison, you must live in a country where either you smuggle it in somehow and you're taking a very big risk using it, or you live in a country that has relatively amazing rights established for prisoners. And well, you're very lucky being wherever you are, because if you were in another country that was more repressive, you probably wouldn't even have the right to say that on the internet. Right? You wouldn't be able to connect to the internet, and connect to the internet, you'd probably be, abused even more than probably what you are suffering now. But if that's true, well, I feel sorry for you. But if you're imprisoned for the wrong reasons, I wish you freedom and soon. But if you're imprisoned because you did something horrible, well, then, I hope you are re-educated well. And whenever you re-enter society, if that is going to happen, then I hope you are not one of the statistics of recidivism who ends up just going back into the slammer. But my point is, Israel is a very tolerant and liberal society. And that's one of the great things about living in a progressive democratic country where people can vote for their leaders. Now, I have my own complaints about how Israel runs its democracy, and I've often said it's not really a democracy. Yes, it's a parliamentary democracy, but people vote for members of party lists, and they don't actually vote for specific individuals to represent a specific constituency, right? They just vote for a party, and then the party determines who gets into the parliament. So in my view, that's not really democratic. It's democratic in that you get to choose your party, who's going to lead you, but the party determines who's going to be serving, and everybody serves at a national level in the Israeli Knesset, or parliament, and they don't represent a specific constituency, like I said. But nevertheless, it's a democracy of some kind, and certainly more democratic than any other nation in the Middle East, even more democratic than Turkey, which claims to be a democracy as well, but is clearly not a democracy because it is ruled by essentially a dictator, and Mr. Erdogan, who basically runs Turkey like his own personal little fiefdom. And Turkey, who, by the way, is a NATO member, has threatened Israel, which is an ally of NATO. He has directly threatened to invade Israel with Turkish forces, okay, or to send military aid directly to Gaza, like as in soldiers, which is insane because, again, Turkey is a member of NATO, and NATO is an ally of Israel, and Israel engages in military training exercises with Turkey. So, there are many different levels of relations between Israel and Turkey. And at the highest level, they're not so good with Mr. Erdogan because he, again, is trying to distract the criticisms of his government by blaming the Jews, which is the same old, tired old story that every dictator in the world has done for thousands of years. And at the same time, Israel has great relations with Turkey at the levels of, for example, various generals or cabinet ministers, or trade, economics and trade relationships, cultural relationships. Right? Israel has great relationships with Turkey, tourism and travel. So it's, as always, more complicated, more complex than it seems on paper. And at the same time, the nature of the conflict between Israel and its various neighbors is also more complex than it appears on paper. Even the relations with Jordan, which the king of Jordan has been extremely vocal in criticizing Israel recently, and so has his wife, who is Palestinian. But at the same time, Jordan and Israel have a peace agreement, and they are at peace since decades. And yet, when 3 Israelis recently were murdered by a Jordanian man at the Allenby Bridge crossing, they celebrated that murder. The people of Jordan celebrated that murder in the streets of Amman. Fireworks and handing out candies and singing and dancing for murdering 3 innocent civilians who did nothing. Right? Just for being Israeli in the wrong place at the wrong time. So is an extremely complex situation, and it's multifaceted, and it's not as simple as just saying, oh, it's a black and white issue. Israel is the aggressor and does all the bad things. No, it's not like that at all. The reality is much more complex than the basic statistics and basic facts would lead you to believe if you didn't know any better. So, to that end, what I suggest that anyone does, if they're interested in learning more about this topic, is first of all, read a thing, learn a thing. Don't assume that what do you write? That's how bad it is. Did I watch the presidential debate? Yeah. Do I listen to Garth? I love Garth Brooks. He's great. I generally like music. There's some music I'm not so into, but generally speaking, I like music. I'm a musician since very many, many years, since I was a young kid, performing live and playing music, and I absolutely love music. I watched the presidential debate. I did actually get to see it because I woke up because my dog had a very rough night. I have an amazing dog, and unfortunately he's going through some things right now. But yeah, so he woke me up, and I managed to see the debate, and it was kind of what I expected it to be. To be honest, I thought kind of the usual things that I expected to hear what Trump would say. None of that surprised me, and frankly, none of what Kamala Harris said surprised me. Missed opportunities to say certain things. Part of it was the format of the way the debate was structured. For example, when she pointed out something about the U.S. being criticized and Trump being laughed at by leaders overseas, and then he said, well, Viktor Orban likes me. Viktor Orban is considered a dictator. He's basically the last dictator in Europe, or one of the last. Him and the guy who runs Belarus, right? They're the last two dictators in Europe. So getting kudos from the last dictators of Europe, not exactly what I would call great credibility. But again, I don't hate people who like Trump. I don't even hate Trump, okay? I have personally met Trump, and I personally met Joe Biden. I spent more time with Joe Biden, but I certainly met Trump and spent professional time speaking with him and his team about things many, many, many years ago, talking about smart buildings and connecting technology, real estate, and all that kind of stuff. And he was a very smart guy talking about the topic and knew certainly what we were talking about. And again, we're talking about the 1990s here, so it was very they were both much younger, in their 40s or whatever at the time. And they had a lot of interesting things to say about all kinds of different topics we were talking about with them, interactive technology and regulation and internet regulation and all kinds of stuff. So I don't hate people who believe one thing or the other. I don't hate people in general, right? Do I think some people do evil things? Yes, but I don't think, Trump is an evil person. I don't think Joe Biden's an evil person. Have they both probably done bad things in their life? It's hard to be in politics for even 5 years or 10 years and be at the highest levels and not have done something like sell your soul, quote unquote, the corporate donors, or donor owners, what you want to call them. I vote for people that own lots of banks, that own a lot of property. Okay, great. Yeah, most people vote for people that either own significant assets, J-Dub, either they own significant assets or whether those are banking assets or property assets or both. That's entirely normal, right? Whether those people own them individually or they're granted some share of them through the people that own the majority of those banks or assets, that's quite normal. Like, that's what donors do. They own politics in America and in many other countries. I literally have to dislike this video and click do not recommend. Okay, you can do that all you want. That's how bad it is. Wonderful. I'm glad you think that. Thanks for letting me know. I'm curious, why do you dislike this video and why do you have to hit do not recommend? I'm just wondering. But the point of this video was to talk about Israel and the wars that it's currently involved in. and to point out that it's not Israel that has started these wars. And it is typical of media bias to see people blaming Israel for starting wars that it is a victim of, right? That it has been attacked first. And you'll say, well, Israel has disproportionate responses to everything. And if they get hit once, they hit back 10 times, and that's not right. Well, then don't hit them in the first place, right? Like, how many times do you need to be hit to understand if you mess with a country who is constantly a threat for decades, since before it was even founded? The people that live there that are Jewish were constantly being attacked, right, by riots led by angry Arabs who refused to have any Jews living on the land, even before there was a state of Israel created, back when it was still the Ottoman Empire that ran the governorate of Palestine, not a country, the governorate, which was part of the Ottoman Empire, kind of like a province of the Ottoman Empire. And then it became the British Mandate of Palestine. So it was ruled by the British. It was not Palestine. There was never a country called Palestine. And then eventually it became Israel. And the land that the Arabs were, were told, here, you can have this. And the Jews were told, here, you can have that. The Jews accepted that land and that deal, the Balfour Declaration, right? They said, okay, we will accept this land. And even though it's the worst parts of the land in terms of the ground that's arable and all those other things, we'll take it. And it's the lowland versus the highland that the Arabs were given control of. And the Arabs were given control of the historic homeland of the Jews, Judea and Samaria. They were given control of the bulk majority of that, right? Even though that's literally the homeland of the Jews, in terms of ancestral biblical homeland, where Jews literally Jews from today can trace through DNA their connection to people living in the land of Israel more than 3,000 years ago. Okay, so that is already, was already a violation, or whatever you want to call it, an abuse of the rights of the Jews to return to their own homeland, even when they were establishing their own country after Theodore Herzl in 1897 proposed the Zionist movement, saying, we must establish a country for Jews to live and not be constantly under the threat of anti-Semitic violence like they are in every other country, for instance, more than 1900 years. So since that time, there has been, increasing numbers of attacks against Jews by Arabs. Now, that's not to say that Israel and Jews have never attacked Arabs unilaterally or without good cause. I mean, there have definitely been times that Jews and even Israel has attacked individuals or groups of people who are Arab, who they should not have. Okay, but the statistical ratio of that, if you're going to compare, is the Jews have done it a negligible amount of times compared to the amount of times that Arabs have done it. That's not a disputable fact. Okay, and you can say, well, the Arabs don't have the power, so they have the right to resist. First of all, just because you are an occupied force does not mean you get to break all international treaties. It does not mean you get to kidnap people and torture them and murder them in cold blood. It does not mean that you can, that's not resistance. Okay, kidnapping babies is not resistance. Sexually abusing, raping, torturing, killing hostages or people that you're holding at gunpoint, maiming them while they're alive, that's not resistance. Okay, and even if you were to say that, then explain to me the 1929 Arab riots in Hebron. Explain to me the all of the riots that the Arabs did against the Jews before Israel was a state. Why did they have to do that? Why did they have to butcher so many Jews who didn't do anything? Why did millions of Jews who were living in Arab countries have to flee those countries once Israel was a state? Was it because the Jews had all the power? Or was it because the Jews had no power and they were being abused by the Arabs that were their hosts, even though they were living there for hundreds of years, in some cases more than thousands of years, like in Saudi Arabia, right? So, or in Yemen. Why is it that the Jews are the targets of attack? It's because Jews are historically the scapegoat for people who hate. Because it's easy to point fingers at the Jews, because Jewish people, generally speaking throughout history, right, have not had the power when they were living outside of their own homeland. They're always the minority, and they were treated like not equal citizens. And it wasn't until Napoleon in France gave Jews equal rights that European countries started to give Jews equal rights as well. And you could say, well, they were treated well in England. Sure, they might have been treated okay in England for certain periods of time. They're certainly not treated well in England for many other periods of time. But it was really Napoleon that put on paper that Jews have equal rights. And it wasn't until Theodor Herzl said Israel needs a state that the Zionist movement was born in 1897. And then that movement established the state of Israel in 1948, following the UN vote that said, yeah, we approve of the Balfour Declaration and we approve of the partition plan to divide the land between the Arabs and the Jews, and we offer most of the land to the Arabs. We'll call it Palestine. We'll offer somewhat less of the land to Jews in terms of arable land to the Jews, and we'll call that Israel. And the Arabs said no. They said, we don't want a state called Palestine. We want all of the land, and we just don't want any Jews there. And they did not want to be called Palestinian, because who were the controlling forces in the land of Israel at the time that were Arab? Well, people from Egypt, people from what is now called Jordan, but wasn't called Jordan before. Right? It was Transjordan or Cisjordan or whatever. It had different names before that. People from Syria, people from Lebanon, people from Saudi Arabia even, right? They all came to the land that is Israel, and what the Arabs could have had as Palestine. Many of them came within the last 120 years or even 110 years, like since after Theodor Herzl said there need to be more Jews in Israel to establish a homeland. Many of them showed up at the behest of the British and French forces, who were then the dominant world powers, who showed up as mercenaries to serve the interest of the British and the French. And many of them showed up as merchants. Many of them showed up as, workers, whatever, to earn more money while working in the land, to send money either, to earn money and bring it back home with them to their homelands, or to just establish a home here in the land of Israel. And, to basically prevent Jews from establishing a homeland was their main goal as a people. But as individuals, they all showed up with their own reasons. But they did not call themselves Palestinians. They didn't have any connection to a Palestinian people. That wasn't a thing. There was no historical Palestinian people. If you showed up in the land of Israel 150 years ago and you asked, where are the Palestinians? People would have looked at you funny. They would have said, there's no such thing. There's people who live on the land of the governance of Palestine, which is Ottoman. And everybody there was either a subject of the Ottoman Empire or they were a visitor, a guest, a traveler, a pilgrim. There were a lot of pilgrims back then. But you can't show me a single person who had a Palestinian passport. Yes, people will say, well, I had a Palestinian passport. Even Golda Meir said that. Yeah, you had a British Mandate of Palestine passport. You didn't have a Palestinian passport. Okay? It was British Mandate Palestine. By the way, Golda Meir, a former prime minister of Israel, was actually born in Milwaukee and spent most of the first 2 decades of her life growing up in the U.S., right? So let's be clear about that. So while she had a Palestinian passport, it was a British Mandate Palestine passport. She was British under the laws. She was technically a British subject. Yes, she was born in America, but she also adopted her British citizenship when she moved to British Mandate Palestine, and eventually became Israeli once the state of Israel was born. And since then, Israel has been attacked relentlessly in practically every decade, either in wars or in ongoing terrorist conflicts or in intifadas, as they call them. Right? Violent attacks directed at Israel, people in Israel, whether they're Israeli, directed people whether they're Jewish or not, because Israelis overseas and Jews overseas, or even Israelis who are not Jewish overseas, targeting them with terrorist actions. which are illegal, and targeting them with military actions, which is a war crime when you're targeting non-combatants. Nevertheless, Israel has survived, and Israel has won every war because it had to. Now, have they won every war outright, decisively? No, they've not been allowed to win any war decisively. They've been forced into ceasefire agreements in every single war that they fought. Forced by whom? Forced by the big powers: America, Britain, France, sometimes Russia, sometimes other countries. Why? Because if the Jews are allowed to have their own homeland and defend it and decisively win and end the conflict, it would do a number of things. One, it would piss off big oil-rich countries that happen to be Arab, that happen to not like the fact that there are Jews living in their own ancestral homeland. This is ridiculous. And somehow, because of oil interests, it's allowed to happen. Think about that. Because of oil, Israel is not allowed to win a war decisively. There's no other reason. Because of oil and oil interests and the political influence that that has around the world, Israel isn't allowed to decisively, kinetically win the war, have a victory be declared, and have the loser of the war surrender unconditionally, just like every other loser in every other war in the world has done historically. And I point often to the Nazis and to the Japanese in World War II, who surrendered unconditionally. Well, the Germans also surrendered unconditionally in World War I. And every other nation that is, the British surrendered at the end of the American Revolution. The South surrendered unconditionally at the end of the Civil War in the United States when they fought against the North. Name me a country that has lost a war and hasn't surrendered and signed a peace agreement with the country that beat them. It doesn't happen. But the reason it happens in the Middle East, vis-a-vis Israel, is because the Arabs refuse to accept that Israel has a right to exist or that Jews have a right to their own homeland, in their own homeland. It's absurd. So when I see articles like that, or when I see, it's just more ignorant, biased, horrible media, and not even ignorant. The New York Times knows very well what the situation is. But they choose to have this bias because it's not just the woke mind virus nonsense that the far-right extreme nut jobs like to say, or other reasonable people like to say also, but a lot of them are far-right nut jobs. It's because the New York Times has a very clear bias for their financial interests, like every company. And their financial interest at the moment, and since decades, has been to attack Israel and to help the bad guys continue to exist. Because that's good for their clicks, that's good for their advertising, that's good for their ability to sell newspapers or subscription to their online newspaper and to sell advertising space to advertisers. That is ultimately the reason they do it. You don't have to like it. Right? Prove me wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. To be reviewed. There you go. That's my short take for you. I will talk about this more later. But I just thought I had to mention this. And also to mention one last thing about this topic, which is about the Philadelphia corridor, which I've spoken about briefly before, and I'll speak about it again now, which is the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Egypt and Gaza, is a strip of road where the Hamas has built tunnel after tunnel. They have hundreds or however dozens, if not hundreds of tunnels there. Every couple hundred meters, apparently, there's tunnels there. It's like a 14-kilometer strip of road. And the Hamas has built so many tunnels there, and they're huge. Like, you can drive trucks through them in many cases. The Egyptians, who are ostensibly at peace with Israel since 1979 or so, 1977, 1979, they signed the agreement with Israel when Sadat and Begin signed the peace agreement at the White House, and then Sadat was killed by Islamic extremists in Egypt during a military parade shortly after. I remember seeing that happen live on TV when I was living in New York. It was horrible. The Philadelphia corridor is an incredibly important smuggling route for the Hamas. It's how they get things in and out of Gaza. So there is an argument that Israel should control it if it wants to stop Hamas from being able to smuggle things illegally into Gaza, like weapons that they're not supposed to have, or to smuggle out things, people like hostages or the leader of Hamas. But then the question is, if they had planned to do that, why wouldn't they have done that in the first 8 months of this ongoing war when they had control of that corridor and Israel did not have control of that corridor? And Israel only took control of that corridor a few months ago. Why did Israel wait so long to take control of that corridor? It's just a 14-kilometer strip of land. It's as tough as it's been, and it's been a hard fight to take it, but Israel was inevitably going to take control of it, and it didn't take them that long to get control. A couple of weeks of effort, and they took it, if not less. Remember, in the 6-day war, Israel faced 4 entire militaries and decimated them in 6 days. On the first day, they decimated their entire air force, and then it was over. The rest of the time was just a cleanup job, getting rid of their infantry and their tanks and things like that. So if they can destroy 4 militaries and militias and armies of assistance from other countries as well, there were basically 7 countries, but say 4 that were really fighting in 6 days. Why do you think it's taken so long for Israel to take over Gaza? It hasn't. It's because Israel is operating surgically and strategically and trying to, even though it doesn't look like it when you look at the satellite damage, Israel is trying to minimize the damage and is trying to get the hostages back. But the problem is, from my point of view, that the prime minister of Israel is prolonging the war, as I said he would on October 7th, because he knows that he knew that this was going to happen. There were warning signs that he ignored. It's well known. He denies it, but it's well known. Well known by people who were in the room with him when he was advised that this is a warning that you got to be careful if this is going to happen. He basically brushed it off. Why? Well, probably for political reasons, because there was division in the country about the judicial reforms he wanted. Now, am I saying that there should be division in the Israeli society about winning the war and getting the hostages back home? No. Israel has to dismantle Hamas and get the hostages back home. But that doesn't mean that we need to have the same prime minister in office. And even if it doesn't matter who's in office, it will be the same situation in the sense of whoever's leading the country would still need to lead the country to victory in the war, and however long that takes. But the fact is, it doesn't need to take this long. Right? Solutions can be found. Solutions can be done. Now, I'm not the prime minister. Maybe he does know something that we don't know. But the probabilities are, given that his own top generals have all said, you don't need to control the Philadelphia corridor, we can take it back whenever we want. Right? Yes, the soldiers on the ground are all saying, no, we shouldn't leave. This is ridiculous. We've sacrificed too much. We've taken this, and we shouldn't just give it up without, getting the hostages back home and having a victory. I agree with them, but also you have to not brush off the expertise of every single top general, not just the ones that screwed up on October 7th, but the actual ones who are in the battle, in the battle now and in the war room and advising him, his top advisors, his top generals, the chief of staff, the head of the Mossad, all these people, the defense minister, who are all saying, look, we can afford to let the Hamas have control of part of this corridor. We can withdraw from part of the corridor as long as we get the hostages back. Now, the problem is that Hamas has not agreed to give back all the hostages. They've agreed to give back some and then maybe some later. I don't think that's okay. Either you give them back all, or Israel has to continue crushing them. Unfortunately, that puts the lives of real hostages at risk. And if you don't understand that the families of these hostages will do anything to get back their loved ones, even if that means leaving other ones there behind temporarily while they get theirs back first, and then Israel keeps pushing to get the other ones back, you have to understand these are human beings. They want their families back. Now, that doesn't mean I'm sowing discord in the Israeli society by saying this stuff, right? It just means I have a different political viewpoint than the prime minister of Israel and many people who support him. And that's fine. That's what democracy is all about, right? You have to be able to allow influence in a democracy. And it is very clear to me that he is doing what he's doing to stay in office because he doesn't want to lose power, because he has to face the music for the screw ups he did about October 7th and for the other things that he's already facing legal problems with before October 7th. And those things that he's facing legal problems with, are things that he was using the judicial reforms as a distraction to not put focus on his illegal activity, or his allegedly illegal activities or criminal activities or corrupt activities or whatever. Okay? He doesn't want to face the music. He wants to hold on to power until he's dead. Well, that's why he keeps going on with the war, in my opinion. Now, I know it's not a popular opinion and whatever. And again, it doesn't mean I don't support the Israeli army winning the war against Hamas. I absolutely do. I just think they can do it a lot faster if the prime minister actually wanted the war to end. But the soldiers are not being allowed to fight. They're being held, they're having their hands tied behind their back. And yeah, it's not America who's tying their hands behind their back. Right? IDF soldiers are being killed every day, or almost every week. There's more dead soldiers in the war in Gaza and on the front with Hezbollah, because the prime minister refuses to do what's necessary to unleash their power and say, okay, end this thing, use your force, do what you can, and end this thing. No, because he wants to stay in power because he doesn't want to face the music. That's the reason. And again, I know it's not popular, but it's a fact. And so he's trying to become a strongman. He's trying to make Israel less democratic in many ways. Personally, I don't agree with that. I think it's a terrible thing. I think he should be not allowed to just stay in power indefinitely. Now, is he still serving out his term as prime minister? Yeah, he is. Do there have to be elections immediately? According to the law, no, there don't. But it is not uncommon in Israel to call for snap elections when people lose confidence in the prime minister. And so the parliament could, in theory, call for elections if there was the willpower to do that. But at the moment, there isn't the willpower to do that. And most people in Israel do back the current prime minister to do what he has to do to prosecute the war. And okay, I'm okay with being a minority opinion in that voice in the world of politics and saying, okay, the prime minister, I think he's wrong and he should resign. A lot of people think that, but the political powers that be and a significant portion of the population don't agree with me. And that's okay. I'm just voicing my opinion about it. It doesn't matter. I don't get to decide that. All people get to do is vote, if anything, like regular people. And only people in politics and only, politicians in the Israeli system anyway, only Israeli politicians get to really determine who serves in the Knesset and if and when there are going to be elections before their scheduled normal time, which is roughly every 4 years. Right? So that's what I think about that. I wish the war would end immediately. I wish all the hostages would get home immediately. I wish there was peace and prosperity between Israelis and Palestinians and Lebanese and Jordanians and Syrians and the entire world, and Ukrainians and Russians and Sudanese and the people that are attacking the South Sudanese, and you name it. There isn't a conflict in the world that I wish would continue. I hate war. War sucks. War is stupid. War is dumb. War is the most idiotic human behavior. And yet it goes on. And you could say, well, the defense contractors are to blame. Well, defense contractors are serving a purpose that they know because there's a market need. Because people are going to go to war. Do they sometimes maybe continue those things by influencing people to continue buying more of their devices to continue the war? Absolutely. Are they always to blame? No, they're not always to blame. Sometimes you just have bad faith actors like terrorist groups and Islamofascists, like you have in Iran or Yemen or Gaza. People who want Islamic extremism. They don't care about politics and diplomacy. Like they brag all the time. They want to die as martyrs. The leaders don't, but the bulk of the people that the leaders lead, they do. Right? The crazy ones, the ones that they have on their side picking up guns and going to fight, they do want to die by the sword. At least that's what they say, and many of them do it. So what's the solution? The solution is education. The solution is denazification, essentially, of these extremist groups, because they're basically Nazis, right? They're just Islamo-Nazis. They want a world of Islamic national, socialist national extremism, and in many cases not socialist, just fundamentalist extremism. Anyway, that's my take on that. I really hope there's peace in the world soon. I know it's not a realistic hope, but you don't get anywhere if you don't have big dreams. You don't make any forward progress if you don't dream big and make a change. You got to make a change to get forward. And you got to make big changes to make peace in a world where there doesn't appear to be any. Okay, that's going to do it for now. Talk to you guys later. Peace.